I think that for this class of participants and to the school, the session by Leonid Gozman is quite an event. I remember our first meeting. I remember his speech in about 1987 or 1988 at the Institute of Philosophy, and he was having a session co-hosted with another young man, and they were talking about fascism, and this was a very psychological, a very intense lecture. And I remembered him and in several years I saw him as a political consultant of Mr. Chubais, Mr. Gaidar, and a very well-known liberal. And this political and a very bold man too, because the most important thing was that Leonid Gozman is not only a liberal, but he is also a liberal who stands his ground. And he is not afraid of the risk. He is not afraid of the danger. I cannot do that myself, but he is. He does that in a very consistent way. We have had several meetings at public places, and I remember his speeches, and there are not many. We hardly ever call the political figures, even liberals, and I think the only exception is Mr. Ryshkov, who has been our graduate. Do you see the ACs? Oh, yes. In any event, Irina Yarova supplied these ACs. So when Mr. Gozman, while he still is a liberal, has left the arena of political struggle for a time or for the rest of the time, and this is his first participation in our seminars. He was thinking initially of this session as a political manifesto, but in joke I asked him to remember that lecture that he had in 1980s, very young, interesting and bright man. Leonid will have about 20 to 25 minute presentation, and then we will have our questions and answer session. Thank you very much. Yeah, we cannot predict how our words would reflect, but let me say a couple of words about myself, because Lena made several compliments, which is of course very important and interesting, but it is equally important to introduce oneself. So let me say a couple of words. I'm a psychologist by education. My basic education is different, but I graduated from the Moscow State University. I taught at the Moscow University for many years. I was a psychotherapist. I was dealt with the psychology of my PhD thesis was on psychology. I had good students. I had a good psychotherapeutic practice, and then suddenly Mr. Brezhnev died, and then they started to die one after another, and this hardly pertained me in any way. I was never a member of the CPSU, the Communist Party. and I believed that has nothing to do with me. And then when Mikhail Gorbachev came to power, many of my comrades and friends were enchanted by him, and I was very skeptical. I remember one of my teachers told me that skepticism is a good thing, but even in skepticism you should not be dogmatic, because the country was changing, the psychology was changing, the political system was the same, the economy was the same, but the moods started to change, attitudes, meetings, rallies, conventions, and I thought to myself, well, I should not be a psychologist without paying enough attention to the things going around us. So we wrote several articles which had a certain renommee, and usually very soon I became at this terrible building on the Staraya Ploshchad, where the first Soviet government under Yegor Gaidar's leadership was there, and I became his advisor in his first government. This was beginning of 1992. Then starting from 1993 I started to work with Anatoly Chubais, the chief enemy of the Russian people. I was his counselor at the government. Then, of course, he was dismissed. Then I went to Rauyes, a member of the board of this huge empire. Mr. Chubais made every person go through an intensive course on the energy matters. Then we completed our mission at the United Energy Systems. Then I was one of the members of the board of Rosnano, and now I am the head of the independent foundation Perspective. I was a political activist. I helped Yegor Gaidar to create the democratic choice of Russia. Then we made the Union of Right Forces. I was one of, one may say, a Dick Cheney, number 2 at this Union of Right Forces, and we were going for elections with Mr. Belich. The Union of Right Forces became a radical organization, and I was indeed my hand was broken by a policeman at a rally, but this was quite accidentally. Then I entered the hopeless project of the Right Cause, and I was one of the co-founders of the Right Cause, and nothing came out of it. So much so for my political career. But what is interesting is that I always believed myself to be a psychologist. When I was dealing with the energy matters, when I was dealing with the nanotechnologies, I believed myself to be a psychologist. Nowadays, I have never missed a year. I always teach a course in psychology at my department at the Moscow State University. I do it every year, and I never missed a year. So, throughout these years, I have been dealing with some specific problems. The lobbying of laws for the energy sector. At the Duma, I was lobbying, I was working with our scientific community and the academia, and if there is anything that I was analyzing at the time was our current political situation, which was more of a analysis for the most vibrant topics of the day. So I'm extremely grateful to Lena for banning me from giving political assessments or naming very high names or lofty names. I'm very thankful to you, because what am I to do then? Because then I have to do something else. So this allowed me to think of more common or general things. And let me just bring to you my conclusions, or some of my conclusions. Thank you. Thank you for your approval. Yeah, you could go on doing it. No, I do like to be praised. But the legitimacy of the civil society and of the government, you will not find a single country. Even if Ms. Yarova is asked, she will say that the civil society is mandatory. But different dictators, I'm not giving any names, the different dictators and their henchmen will tell you immediately that a true civil society, a self-regulatory civil society, is dangerous because we don't know where it will eventually end up with. So it is better to create the fake civil societies, some sort of pocket organizations. And with these fake organizations, you can somehow live up and survive. And I talk to many different people who think in that way. And not just Russians. I had a long discussion with the Turkish men, with the Turkish political scientists, with the Korean political scientists, and their arguments are very, very difficult to reject because they're quite logical. But because I do not disagree with them, let me try and analyze why civil society is required. We have to depart, to move away a little bit and try and understand and enter the history, human history. I am truly a Russian pro-Westerner, or liberal, if you wish. The pro-Westerner is probably not the best word. A universalist. What is indeed the great argument for several past centuries? Should we have something special, or should we have something very, very unique? This, by the way, no way repudiates the true unicity or the cultural specifics of Russia. And to people who believe that Russia should have a special way, to them it is an essential thing. So I am one of the Russian liberals, but a liberal does not mean an anarchist, because a liberal is not against the statehood or a state. We vote for a strong state, a strong police, the unwavering observance of the law. We are for discipline, because we believe that these institutions create a society where people can live side by side. The state must provide for the security, inner and outermost, and so, of course, the state must counteract the terrorism. How about the thugs? Of course, we have to have strong police. But the thing is, and everybody agrees with that, but is a strong state identical with the control over a human, an individual? The historical development, if we look at it, if we look how the societies were changing, and of course the different names of the czars, and where did we start with as a human species? We started with anarchy. We started with classical anarchy. Might is right was the motto, and this was indeed the human condition for several millennia. But people get very tired of such life, and eventually this war of all against all, this anarchy, the dictatorship ensues. And a dictator always comes as a savior. a saver from injustice. Any dictator, Hitler, Pinochet, they all come to power against the background of chaos. And for that reason, their propaganda is always primarily interested in increasing the entropy or the chaos and the order of the preceding historical period, because such a repudiation of the chaotic past serves as an argument for their regime. Hence, we have the very different varieties of dictatorship, the bloody, more liberal, enlightened and not enlightened, wild, like Ivan IV, or liberal as Alexander II. Of course, he was also a dictator. He was an autocrat. He was an autocratic czar. So this dictatorship evolve. Then throughout years they may be converted into democracies. And the dictators start to involve more and wider circles in the society, entering and involving more and more people into the political process. First aristocracy, then males, then females, and eventually it ends up with the universal suffrage. But this is not the crown of the summit of civilization. In the United States, one of the most developed democracies in the world, there are a lot of jokes about lawyers, because lawyers are generally disliked. How can one check if a lawyer says lies? It's when his lips move, or when what does a person say that a lawyer's corpse floats down the river? Finally, they say, it started. They hate the lawyers because the democracy became over-bureaucratized. There are so many laws, and the lawyers squeeze you of money. They give you a haircut. And indeed, I remember I taught in America for 6 months, and I lived in the middle class neighborhood. My neighbor was a retired colonel, another professor, and so on and so forth. And these people were making agreements. They agreed to make, say, a barbecue square, a barbecue, or else they decided to go and it's a quarter. There is no formal election. There is no formal procedure. So really, this is some sort of an anarchy. But this is a civilized anarchy. This is what we call the civil society, in my view. And in today's developed democracies, the absolute non-formal or informal, self-organized, self-regulating associations start to prevail. But the historical trend of the condition of man in a state is the lowering of dependence. You might think as to how come that we no longer depend on so many things that we depended in the historical past. For instance, we no longer depend on the faith or religion of our parents, because if you were born in a Muslim family, you were a Muslim. You could not move in any way. Nowadays, it really doesn't matter. Even in our country, which is by far not the most socially mobile, we are less dependent on the place of our birth or on the social condition of our families. We are less dependent on transportation. And let me take an example. A Pakistani boy from a forgotten neighborhood teaching at Stanford University. I don't know why should people change genders, but the modern technologies allows for that, and there are people who change their gender because this is what they want to do. There are people who can say, when I was a man, and there are territories in the world where these phenomena do not evoke hatred or animosity. This lacking of the decrease of dependence can be seen in different societies, even in feudal societies, even in the archaic monarchy of pre-1917. There was a notion of a personal nobility. So a person could be given nobility or the status of a nobleman, even coming from a family of humble stock. So indeed, this predetermination was gradually becoming more meritocratic. Let us give the example of the House of Lords, which used to be hereditary and will no longer be hereditary at all. It will only be meritocratic. But at no stage of human development, an efficient state is not possible without legitimacy of power. Of course, there is legal legitimacy, but I'm talking about perceptions. When I read, when I think that the person who sits on the throne has the right to sit in the throne, he has the right. It is about the perception. Many people don't like the police. For instance, however, we can all agree that the traffic policemen, whom we believe to be corrupt officials, that the traffic policeman has the right to wave his baton and for us to stop. This is his right. We recognize this right. We recognize the right to register that I sped up and to issue a fine. I may hate him for trying to extol a bribe for me, but still I think that he has the right to wave his little stick. And indeed, this is a matter of perception. And this perception is not a law, but a matter of agreement, a matter of contract. Graham Greene has a novel, Our Man in Havana, where the Cuban policeman in the pre-Castro Cuba is telling about the tortures in Batista's Cuba. Why do you use torture? Because a Cuban peasant understands that he may be tortured, but we will never torture you, an English gentleman, because you disagree with that. Of course, this is a great exaggeration, because everybody can be tortured, even an English gentleman, but there is something about it. Ivan IV was killing people as a hawk, and people were very much discontented, but they indeed recognized his right. He was the Tsar. But think about the legal state of, say, Alexander III or Nicholas II. He was an autocratic Tsar. They were autocratic Tsars, no limitations. But Alexander III or even Paul I could not just kill. And they did not. This social contract did not allow them to do that. People recognized their right to be Tsars, but did not recognize their right to kill at will. And Nicholas II made a terrible mistake. On the 9th of January of 1905, when the workers and laborers came to him with the icons, he allowed for this crowd to be shot at. And the peaceful demonstration was shot at, and Georgy Gapon, who was not an agent provocateur of the Tsar's police, but Father Georgy Gapon said that we no longer have the Tsar. We don't have the Tsar. And in 12 years he was assassinated. Yes, you are an autocratic Tsar, but you must not shoot at people. This was not written in any law. There were no laws. If a Tsar could shoot at the crowd, and Ivan the Fourth could do that because the people recognized his right to kill and torture. Well, this is a matter of legitimacy, a matter of perception, and there are many ways of obtaining legitimacy. Time is probably the best tool. This has always been the case. For 700 years, the British monarch says the throne speech in the same way. Of course, this might be a very different carriage compared to what they had 300 years ago, and the Queen may not be deciding anything. The Prime Minister who stands at the door, and the Lords who do not make any decisions still sit while the Prime Minister stands. This performance is played out, and as it has been played out for 700 years, this has acquired in the eyes of the people a certain legitimacy.
So you shouldn't touch anything. It comes from the sun or from the god. The King of Jordan, Hussein, the second King of Jordan, and his son, King Hussein, was in the office for a long time. He was quite efficient. So in his time, independent Jordan historians conducted an independent study and found out that the King Hussein is the follower, a successor of a prophet. But you know what it means in the Muslim country. So he was the successor of a prophet. So it goes through the god, or through success, like in Germany, through the law. Why you are the king? Because I'm the son of a former king. So it's a dynasty. So you have to find out whether you are not an impostor. You are truly the son of the king, or you were substituted in your childhood. Or why you are a president? Because you were elected. In America, many people do not like Obama. His rating falls down, which is normal. But Obama is not to be elected again, so he doesn't mind. Because he's the president, not because he's loved, but because in November he was elected by the majority, and that's it. And that's the end of the discussion. Why there were no military coup d'etats in America? The White House is not protected pretty efficiently. It is protected from some missiles now, but in the past it was not. And special troops might take the White House without any problem. There was a man who came to the White House, and he took out a gun and shot at the windows. And I know an expert on the defense side, and they said that he was crazy. He was offended by someone, and he decided to shoot at the president. Now, just imagine that you go to Novo-Ogaryovo and shoot. So the law is legitimacy. And there is also legitimacy from charisma. Why Fidel Castro was in office for about 50 years. 50 years. Why? The country is very poor and the situation is terrible, but he was in office because he was Fidel. One of my friends listened to the speech of Fidel. He doesn't speak English, and Fidel spoke about 4 hours, and he said, you can follow this man. He emanates, something emanated from him. Fidel is Fidel, and you should follow him. This is charisma. The power based on charisma, that's really good, because this power has no limits, but it's very dangerous at the same time, because charisma may disappear. It's like in human relationships. Yesterday you were in love, and everything this girl did made you happy, but today the situation changed. That happens. And that happens in the relationships of people with their leaders. People loved him yesterday, but they don't love him any longer. What shall you do? You should change the base of legitimacy. You may hold elections. It's risky. It's risky, dangerous. You are not accustomed to it. Well, you say to Fidel, let us hold the election. He doesn't understand what it is. Probably he would be afraid. Or else you can do something really good for everybody to live well, but you can't do it. You can't do it quickly anyway. What else can you do? Then you should overwhelm your enemies. Take the upper hand of your enemies. That's very good. So you need a feeling of success. For instance, when you open your refrigerator and you see that everything is there. Because you have a proper ruler and everything is fine. But if your refrigerator is empty, what you do then? Henry IV invented a very important criteria of efficiency of his power. He said that every land owner needs to have a chicken in his pot once a week. And Henry traveled along his country pretty often, and on Sunday he checked whether the chicken is there in the pot or not. And everybody was happy, and everybody thanked the king. And suppose the king didn't follow his own promise, then he would be bad. This is dangerous. This is dangerous. So probably you promise something which you can't check. Mission is good in this respect. Our people, they have a special mission, like distribute Islam all over the world, or communism for that matter. This is good for power, because it's difficult to check whether it's distributed well or not well. It takes decades, not months. You can't use it for your election campaign. And of course, mission is nice. You remember how we conquered the foreign land. But why should you go to another country? And then we were surprised that they were afraid of us. There is another song which is called Grenada. I left my home and went to fight to return the land to peasants. Who invited you to this land? But this looks nice. Take Kipling. He wrote wonderful lyrics about conquering, about the extension of your empire. Wonderful verses. but nobody is saying the exploit of the British general governor who pulled down the British flag and left the island. And he left it in such a way that he was not shot in the back, and British monarch is still respected, and British parliamentary system is still there, and system of education is there. So it's very tricky to live this way. This is a real exploit. This exploit cannot be even compared with the exploits of conquering. But sometimes people ask, for how long is it going to be like this? People start asking questions. And the good thing is the enemy at the gates. When there is an enemy at the gate, when we are a fortress, a besieged fortress, when all the world is against us, this is a gift, especially if you don't have any enemy. If you do have the enemy, you have to fight. But if the enemy is concocted or invented, it's different. So inefficient leaders all over the world invent their enemies, because this unites your nations, and you can check it. This is not the chicken in the pot. But this is a blind alley. Political structures get destroyed under such circumstances. Somewhere people are killed, somewhere it is done financially, depending on time, on the character of a leader. More blood and less blood, but it gets destroyed as a result. Internal calls to change the system are destroyed. Democratic system is not for justice, it's for the development of the society. When someone starts violating the law, someone else comes in his stead, and probably later he would violate the law as well. But there is a certain balance here. But the system which fights the world to restore legitimacy through a small war, for instance, Nicholas II fought with Japan. Why? What for? Pleve, the Minister of the Interior, said that we need a small, victorious war. And this war, by the way, prepared 1917. So, and in the end, it's either occupation or revolution. That's how it changed, how it ended in Japan and Germany. In 1917 we had a revolution when Russian monarchy was dumb enough and was unable to respond to the challenges of time, and everything exploded. So it's speaking about our country. Well, we have room for optimism, but not much. Well, we have educated people in big towns, and they are accustomed to different standards of life. They don't want to move in line. We have high technologies, they are there. And I have seen that working in Rosnano. It's very important that our workplaces are technological and modern. Because if you work under hard conditions, you want to drink a glass of vodka in the evening. But if you are an educated person, if your job is smart, you want to be respected, you want to be taken into consideration, you don't want to march in line, and so on. So this is also the room for a certain optimism, and chief thing is the civil society in this regard. Americans determined the democracy as the power of armed men, meaning that armed men not to shoot at each other, they should settle the rules and delegate powers, and so there came the democratic state from the bottom. That is the case of America. So I think that the people who work to improve the life of people, or they fight evil, they look differently at their own field, and they come up with a parallel structure and with different demands. In Brezhnev time, I remember a drunk man on the street. He was offended by someone, and he was shouting, describing his offense. He said, "I will go to Brezhnev," and then he said, "I will go to Sakharov." Sakharov was a dissident and nobody. He was an exile, so I'll go to Sakharov. That's what he said. So this is a parallel structure. If today a family in Yekaterinburg has a problem and they understand that their child takes drugs, they wouldn't go to the medical institution, but they would go to Evgeny Roizman. Because that's what he did. He is known for his work to protect young people from drugs. These are parallel structures. And then something good should be formed out of this civil society. You have a demand for a different system, and people would be united not at the basis of politological ideas, liberal or left, nationalist. I don't know what is the political orientation of Roizman, but I know that Roizman fights the real evil. So this is the basis for unity and to develop different demands for political representation. That's it. Yeah, well, actually, I spoke more than I was supposed to. I once was in New York when there was Henry Kissinger. It was several years ago. He was old enough at that time, and there are people and Kissinger in the presidium next to the anchor, and he sleeps. And the anchor says, "So probably we should not represent you, Dr. Kissinger. Everybody knows him." He opens his eyes. He says, "No, you can introduce me. I like to be said good things about myself." All right, colleagues, we may discuss what you just heard. When Lena invited Kissinger, he did not sleep here. No, you cannot sleep here. Well, we had a meeting in President Hotel several years ago with him, and he was in good condition. Yes, you can't sleep with people like that. Evgeny Konoplev, Moscow. You said that any country may be occupied or taken by the revolution, which is worse. That's what you said. Can you explain what you mean? It was said about a conditional country. I may quote our president, who said that the sovereignty of Russia is not in danger, and I like it very much because I was afraid. So I mean that any country without mechanism to self-development, where these mechanisms are destroyed, so in this country it is either occupation or revolution, which is even worse. It's more dangerous. Of course, in case of Hitler, his regime was barbaric, but American occupation of Japan or occupation by the allies of the Reich territory was positive, and both for Japan and for Reich population. Otherwise, it's an explosion. But there are contradictions which should be removed. If you don't remove these contradictions, put them in the corner, so in the end, something would explode, like it happened in our country in 1917. Did we need such horrors for decades, lots of victims? Couldn't we move on with constitutional monarchy like everybody else? So we were not lucky about our last leader in Russia. And Gaidar said that the most horrific thing that may happen in any country is the revolution. It is not always true. And revolutions they may be good, but not as good as people who make it think. I remember meetings in the end of the 80s. It didn't turn out the way we wanted it to be, but it was better than to stay in the Soviet Union. Revolutions take place when the country is on the verge of something, when the country is on the brink of famine, civil war, and so on. So you'd rather not come to this line. Timur Uzhanov, in Ingushetia wild Caucasus. My question. You brought an example of someone who fights the evil, but how do you determine this border between the good and the evil? So, as to wild Caucasus, I know Dagestan pretty well, not Ingushetia, and it's fantastically interesting there. And I wouldn't make this kind of joke because the Caucasus is not wild, not at all. As to the borderline between good and evil, well, I do not agree with Solzhenitsyn in many things, but in one of his novels, The First Circle, one of his characters representing the point of view of the author himself, when someone says, some of the prisoners said what the criteria are, and this man said, if you hit wolves, you are right. If you eat people, you are wrong. And there are 10 commandments. There is a human moral. If you sell drugs, you are an enemy. You are an enemy of humankind. And if you are a military person or served in the militia, then you are twice an enemy. Roisman fights these people. He says these are enemies. They are to be destroyed. And he does well. When you mentioned the Wild West, I used the term of Wild Caucasus. That's what I had in mind. I don't know about Ingushetia, but in Dagestan this is so. Dagestan was the only place when the right cause party managed to enter the local parliament, but I spent there 3 weeks trying to arrange things because the elections are quite specific there. In the day of election, you don't see any election activity, but then it turns out that everything was on the election. So I talked to one of local feudals, he is well protected. He's in armament. Everybody is armed. And then out of the waste he takes a gun, puts it on, and I say, why do you need a gun? You have so many armed people around. Because I need it so that nobody humiliates me. So the arm and independence based on this, on arm, that's one of the foundations of democracy. And the president of Dagestan is not so authoritative comparing with the authority of any governor in the central part of Russia. Formally speaking, the procedures are similar. You may vote first and then count votes, or you may first count votes and then to vote. Formally speaking, there is no difference. Olga Fadeyeva, Yugra, you are the head of the Foundation of Perspective, right? My question then, what programs do you support for the civil society? No programs at all. And this is a very small foundation, very small. Which is looking for money itself, and he doesn't give anything to anybody. We do not have such possibilities. There are other foundations, which like Gaidar Foundation, and they organize certain important events. And then what is the activity of this Perspective Foundation? There was a joke about what you eat, and he said, I cannot tell you over the phone what I eat. So this is my answer to you. This is not a telephone talk. Sergei Burtsev, Krasnodar. We have seen many examples of civil activity within the last years when the society substitutes the state. I am talking about fires in Moscow area, flood in certain parts of our country, now assistance to refugees from the Ukraine. I talked to Ren Kazaryan, who immigrated now from this country. He said it's all very well, but if the bridge was flooded and we collected money and built the bridge, then we will be responsible for this bridge if it is destroyed. And we like our town, and we go to our parks and clean the territory. Shouldn't we concentrate our efforts on making proper services work? Otherwise, our activity would end in degradation.
Thank you, but how else could you make degradation even more than what we see today? I don't see any contradiction here. It seems to me you should construct a bridge and at the same time require that those guys to whom we pay taxes should keep and do maintenance about this bridge. But people who erected the bridge, they will do it more in a more responsible and conscientious manner. This is it. This is the difference as I see it. Vadim, you now have the floor, please. Tell me, please, what's your take on the way to acquire legitimacy by the government at the municipal level? You quoted the activities of Gozman. I disagree with his methods because it's not a good example, but other areas to develop not only agreement and good, but also trust at the very bottom level. Could you quote this? Well, certainly, a friend of mine, for a while, she was elected as a municipal deputy in Moscow, and her election voting fund was $1,000 that was donated by her voters. As she just rang the door of every neighbor in the house, she said, look, this is, I'm that many years old, I'm not married, I have a child, I live here, I want to put the benches here in place in our park, and I want to build something here, and this scoundrel who has been stealing and who's been taking bribes, I want to displace him. And yes, they voted for her, and she was elected deputy. It's a tiny, tiny voters' band, but she was elected, and she never let them down, actually. Never let them down, okay? There's nothing you can do. Please remember to give your name. Natalia Zakharova from Khanty-Mansi election district. Thank you for this brilliant presentation. At the end of the presentation, at this first day of our seminar, you mentioned that, regrettably, today there are many fakes in civil society. My question to you is, where do we take this charisma or this spark to awaken the real civil society in the province? What do you do about this? Well, I don't know. I suppose it should happen on its own, spontaneously, you see? Well, like Golitsyno put in one of his songs, it's no use urging those people who don't want to wake up. It's useless to urge them to wake up. It won't help, but I suppose the critical mass of people who really care of whom it matters, and certainly the question is not about urging them about awakening the civil society. It's all about helping, surviving in the hostile environment, all those who want to do something. When I speak about hostile environment, I don't mean our country alone. I suppose any state in any country is somewhat cautious and suspicious of independent civic society structures. I'm mayor, was elected, and I see these guys who stand in my way. What are they doing really there? So it's normal. It's the built-in conflict. It's normal. It's actually constructive. It makes me as a mayor work better when I fear you as civil society. I shall work trying to improve what I do, otherwise I will not be elected next time, re-elected. I suppose we should help them. We should help them address all kinds of problems: legal, financial, fundraising, security, safety, constructive programs, and many, many other things. For that matter, optimistic issue. I know that at least some of our very rich people are ready. They're not ready to go into politics or invest into politics for the reasons that we all understand, but they are ready to invest into civil society. I'll share these stories with you. Well, next person, please. Vachtank, please, you now have the floor. Vachtank Tsatsanava from Georgia. Well, you know, in Western countries, the driving engine for democracy is middle class in society. In principle, if you look at post-Soviet space, not including the Baltic states, excluding the Baltic states, this class exists in Russia. Why do you think in Russian society the middle class has not become the driver, the engine for democracy, for promoting democracy? Well, I have two views on this. First of all, I'm not at all confident that middle class is the driving engine of democracy in Western countries. There could be discussions about whether it is middle class, semi-middle class, or whatever. This is just a real structure in society. It's hard. But if you speak about us, about Russia, I would say that yes, middle class is an engine of democracy. Gaidar used to say that authoritarianism could not exist in a country where average income is above $15,000. Well, I don't know where he took this figure from, but he was smart, he knew. But in Bolotnaya Square, who was there? Or in realism meetings, who were they? Those people who were qualified people, qualified, high skills. They were not people just, unqualified labor. No, they were not like this. They were people who are using their intellect to make money. They're not really rich people, but with normal good living standard. This happened. This was their demand, and the demand not for some political party. It was their demand for changing the character relations between the state and society. They say we want it in a different way. So we think that it is the engine of democracy. A totally different story is that, well, the engine is usually takes a lot of time. It is very slow in gaining momentum and gaining speed. For 70 years we lived under crazy conditions, really crazy, mad. It doesn't mean that life was bad. No, we had good things in our life at that time too. But there were principles which organized our life were absolutely mad. We used to destroy it all for 70 years. We would slowly but surely, I was sure this will happen, this will evolve. Sasha, please, you now have the floor. Sternov Alexander from Bryansk. If you remember, a year and a half ago, our television showed an animation serial, like animation like dolls, like something, or puppets. And Chubais was demonstrate an invisible nanotank. When he sneezed, nanotank disappeared, went into nowhere. And this is just a joke, but recently nanotechnologies were just showed a smartphone that became obsolete before it was demonstrated, or they work for nanocomposites, which they tried to make, but there was a lot of they enjoyed high profile, but there's nothing good that came out of it. What's the point of it, and is there anything good that would follow? The only thing I do not work for Rosnano. I do not work there. I do not work there. So to make it clear, it doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for it. I work for it, but I speak from my own capacity. Whatever I say has nothing to do with nanotechnology to Anatoly Chubais or any of my friends. It's my personal viewpoint. I just have been repeatedly faced with just in some Komsomolskaya Pravda. I'm sorry if there have people who have here, but I honestly consider Komsomolskaya Pravda Yellow Press when they highlight when I'm a director of humanitarian projects for Rosnano. No, I'm not. I suppose nanotechnologies are needed and they're successful. The smartphone, I don't know, I haven't seen it, but what I can say for it is that from what things really have been done. For example, there are two factories that make glass with special additives, nano additives. It's very much like this tank. They are invisible, but for that matter, I suppose at the website of Rosnano there is a special tab, jokes about nano, like 8 million nano robots held a manifestation in Red Square, and it was noticed by anybody. What is it? Nano glass means nano additives. Looks very much the same as plain glass, but heat conductivity is 70% less. It means you need less energy to heat and cool this room. It means you need less oil. It means you need less money. So on and so forth. It means progress. So it's sold very effectively and very well. Another thing that they've just opened a plant to produce drugs to treat prostate cancer. Well, this medication, there have been many medications around that they make at the global level, really world level, that deliver the medication into a sick cell target. They don't target like chemotherapy that really attacks all the cells in the human body. It's like high precision weapons that one of again, I keep saying it's not it's Rosnano factories. I don't remember where in Russia it is positioned. They make something that is exclusively in demand. That is sensors of methane for mines that are bought by America and Western Europe. They make top class, best in the world sensors in the world. Rosnano has opened 50 industrial sites and factories. 50. It has created several dozen jobs jobs. And it's high-tech jobs. They are the people who don't use just brutal force. It's just, I felt we're in a Silicon Valley in the US. Guys who don't speak Russian. The only difference is that they speak Russian, but they can't speak English. And for that matter, in the Silicon Valley, everybody speaks Russian. So I felt very much like we're in California. So I think it all matters and important and is quite successful. Sasha, sorry, we cannot start a discussion about nanotechnology. Sasha, that would be enough, please. Dear colleagues, please, we continue. Okay. High School of Economics, please, you now have the floor. As a joke, was highest school. Alexandrovska, Moscow region, High School of Economics. I try to bring together theory and practice. John Landell, who identifies interest groups such as custom protection, support groups, and institutional groups. As a political analyst, political consultant, maybe you will say something to today's government. Which interest groups would you find more convenient to work with? Maybe from psychological, I mean, to today's government? Well, there are two problems here, as I see here. They forbade us, Rosnanov forbade us to give the names, and Gosduma has forbidden several words. Now, obscene words in Russia are now outlawed, so I find it hard to answer your question. So, Khabarovsk. Marina Ilyushenko from Khabarovsk, tell me please, what happens with SPS in the regions, with your party in the regions? I have an impression that you're not visible and you're not seen there, because I keep track of the political life in my region as well, in Khabarovsk. Well, he didn't answer anything, he just burst into crying. The Union of Right Forces was suspended in 2006, and I was the one who was instrumental there. At that time, we could no longer continue existence because we had nothing but $5 million of debt. Guys who were responsible for money were really facing criminal investigation. We were not allowed to take part in any election whatsoever. Before that, they showed that we are supported by 0.0% of support from the population to the civic force, and they just put 0.1. That was just a fine joke by some people in Kremlin who put it this way. They said, we put it especially so that you should understand what you are in this country. So at that time we tried to promote the right cause. We kept this movement, the Union of the Right Forces. We have about several dozen regional entities and structures, but in general, very much like the political life in this country, it is all is not very much attractive, for that matter, regrettably. I'm the president of the Union of the Right Forces, and I try to do the guys who are with us so that they should maintain this identity. So twice a year we hold our meetings, we hold some events and so on. As a real political force, the Union of the Right Forces does not exist nowadays. Who's next, colleagues, please? Please, milady. Anna Matsyukhina from Ukraine. My question to you is as follows. At this time, Ukraine has returned to the constitution of 2004, to parliamentary and presidential form of government. At this time, we see certain, say like the Communist Party was abolished, so as of October they want to do re-election into the Supreme Council of Ukraine. If the processes that are underway in the civil war that is raging in the country, whatever name you use here, will the Supreme Council be legitimate in case of re-election? Well, it seems to me that it will be legitimate. But you mentioned the ban on the Communist Party and something else. I should say that I do not really approve all the things that today's government in Ukraine is doing. I don't think they're right. I suppose what the Supreme Rada started with after Yanukovych fled the country, they started bilingualism, two languages in the country, sorry. I suppose they couldn't do anything more stupid to provoke the conflict. Turchinov certainly did not sign it, certainly he blocked this, but they made the first step. They made the first step, and that was really absolute idiocy. I'm not sure that Communist Party should be outlawed, but I'm not Ukrainian, you know. I'm a citizen of Russia, so I have my viewpoint on this. There's so much for legitimacy. I suppose it will be legitimate, very much like legitimate is the President Pyotr Poroshenko, because if you look at the map, the zone where this fighting is going on, this tragedy, people are dying there, it's horrible. It is a nightmare, but nevertheless, if you look at the map, from this humanitarian and moral aspect, if we sort of move away from this, if we look at the map, the zone where combat action, it is a tiny part of the Republic of Ukraine. It's very small. It's a small part of the two regions, whereas you have, if I'm not mistaken, 25 regions, right? And this is a small part of the two regions, very much like presidential election. They were held despite the fact that they did not take place, and the electorate committee recognized that the election did not take place in two regions. And the same way election into the Supreme Rada, if the war doesn't end, it seems to me that it is coming to an end, and I hope it will soon end. But if it doesn't end, it will be even a greater tragedy, even greater, because it may not end only if we intervene there openly with our banners flying. And this Russo-Ukrainian war, can you imagine a large, full scale? It's really a nightmare. But if this war ends, and even if it does not end, well, it means in some small territories this election will not take place. But overall, most territories in the Republic of Ukraine that are populated by they will vote, and they will have a normal parliament. I suppose it's very reasonable that President Poroshenko set the objectives from the very start to re-elect the Supreme Rada, and I suppose it's very reasonable that he suggests that we should have urgent early election in the local parliaments, local magistratures in the zone of conflict, because, well, what is needed is that they should have legitimate people who represent Donetsk and Lugansk region, so that you could speak to these people, not fire at them, but talk to them. But in order to speak to them, you need to you don't need to fire them. Who do you speak there? Do you speak to Girkin? That's not serious. Milady, you lost hope. Please, milady. Tatiana Svintsova, Moscow region. Allow me to express my admiration with your knowledge about all the matters and questions, and for being such a brilliant stylist. It's a pleasure to listen to you. I wanted to ask you advice about how to organize civic society in the village where I live, Chornaya Gryaz, a well-known village. It's described in the last chapter by Alexander Radzyshchev and his book, notorious book, Travel from St. Petersburg to Moscow. That had the largest postal station because it was the first postal station after Moscow, the first postal station where everybody would rest and change horses, and that was the place where I think it is a sacred place, because in an admiring manner it had visitors from everybody traveled there. This is where they sent abroad Belinsky forever and Herzen. Pushkin, it is where Pushkin stopped many times, and he started to read from the sort of back. They traveled from St. Petersburg to Moscow, and as he traveled, he read it from Moscow to St. Petersburg. So Gogol, Dostoevsky. Well, in general, my lady, I apologize for... what are you driving at? I'm driving at this. The thing is that I cannot create civil activity about preserving this monument. It's being destroyed under our eyes. This monument was in brilliant condition 10 years ago. It belonged to the Ministry of Healthcare. There was, at a time, a Soviet hospital that was under the patronage of Denis Davidov, a well-known character in Russian history. When somebody wants to demolish things like a chapel, people need to be... But if we speak about Pushkin, then it's impossible to explain to them that we need to save it. It turns out that for 10 years I'm alone fighting for this monument. There was a case of arson, and it is dying under eyes. What do we do? What would you do? Do we understand you correctly that in Chorny Grass little has changed since the times of Radzyshchev? Nothing much has changed. This is exactly as Radzyshchev described it back in the late 18th century. I've exhausted my resources. I've written to every office and nothing works. It's dying. I want you, please give me some piece of advice. I will be very grateful to you. Thank you. After what you told about me, I certainly want to I feel very much, flattered, and I want to look very attractive and and fulfill every request that you make. But here I'm afraid I will disappoint you, but I have no idea how to save monuments. And if the people who live there, who live in this village of Chorny Gres, who do not really care about this monument, it means that they don't care. That's it. They don't care, really. You spoke about arson. Why was it? Did they try to ignite it? I've spoken to our administration many times, and the head of this administration is telling me that they were very lucky, that she understands what's its importance. It's not about... It should interest people in our village and all of us, I suppose, each of us sitting here and all the country, because it's our common heritage, our own joint heritage. Arson. I don't know who did this arson, who was to blame. They told me that this is protected by the state. It turned out that it was not, and they demolished the plaque. Who is doing it, we don't know, but nobody is now protecting, and it's dying under our own eyes, and I'm really close to despair. Why did I ask you about this, about arson? Because they told me about the situation in Tomsk, where monuments, Tomsk is famous for architectural monuments made of wood. Traditional Russian cottages, and all of a sudden they would burn because it was very conveniently located downtown, and nothing helped. They couldn't. Then people invented something. It was a matter of genius. You don't need to protect, and they stopped it. They lobbied a decision taken by the municipal government that bans to build anything on the place of the arson during 25 years. If something burns down, okay, 25 years ban on building. You can't build anything there for 25 years. Say to build a hotel or a shopping mall. No. If you want an arson, you'll get it, but like Geostrate, but you can't make money on this. That's why I'm asked. Maybe this is something you should do in your village. And it seems to me that I don't know what I would do. I would try to not so much immobilize this village. If they don't care, they do not care. There's nothing doing. Maybe they will live to grow to understand it, or no, in 100 years. If you want to save it, then you should appeal to those who care. Well, start with Academy of Sciences, Literary Society, journals, descendants of Pushkin, and so on and so forth. They are the people, as I see it, whom we should talk to. Please. Anna Martinova from Sochi. I'll go back to the topic of your lecture, where you said that the conflict between civic activists and the government in place is a stimulus, where the government fears civic activists, and it is a stimulus that makes the government work better in in exercising their duty. But in today's Russia, for some 10 years, we've seen civic initiatives which are not in conflict with the current government, or rather help it. Well, but in this case, what these civic activists do, then these activities are snubbed by other civic activists. Do you think a conflict is a must? Or can we reach an agreement? I suppose we should reach an agreement. I suppose that even unreliable peace is better than a good open quarrel. But this exists, this conflict exists by default. Well, you spoke about the bridge. It's clear that the government is ready to build the bridge, because otherwise they would not probably do it if it were not for the activists who would keep saying about it. But government should fear. Government should fear political opposition. Government should fear the press, should fear the courts. this civil society, Obama is fearful. And Hollande, they fear civil society, and it's right and it's good. That's why life there goes on more or less normally. Dear colleagues, I can see that the demand is fully met, and in this forum we have the hour for our civic activity. For this reason, I would just right now try to close this session, but before we do it, I will express my own activity, and Lena certainly allowed me to do it. I want to express my admiration about this first presentation that our distinguished expert did. Let us thank our expert. Well, you know, a member of Russian intelligentsia would want nothing more rather than to talk about the fates of his motherland.